The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to all of you, the family here, the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show family. How y'all doing? Let's see who we have here. Sister Robin, greeting. Brother Ogawa, greetings. And Brother Wolf Manlu. These are the stalwarts right here. Greetings. So how's everybody doing? And for those who come on as we go on, as we always say, encourage people to hit the like button if you like the show, and to also hit the red button for those that haven't subscribed before. That's your way to subscribe to the show. So I also want to thank people who have made financial contributions to the show, and some have sent in, one in particular, I'll acknowledge her next week, a donation for the year. So that is showing some real commitment, and that's helpful for this show because it's costly. To Yvette Anderson, good morning. Good to see you. And Ed Donaldson. So there have been a series of shows that have been going on for the last 3 weeks, and this will be an extension of those. And before I get into those, I just wanted to make a few comments on what's going on right now with your government, the one you didn't elect, most of you. One that claims to have a mandate and whose approval ratings hover in the high 40%, reflecting almost exactly Trump's base. And we'll see how that base holds up as some come to realize that what is being pictured as an effort to carry out efficiency and end government waste through attacking big government. We'll see what happens as it dawns on them that it's them that's being cut along with us, the rest of us. So just a few comments of what's been going on. Basically, it's Project 2025 on steroids. And I don't think the only technical difficulty I had was about coming on 3 minutes late. That's all. I didn't have any others. And Sister Gloria Briscoe. So this has been projected as a effort to streamline government and to produce government efficiency. And it's supposed to be reducing the cost of government. That's its selling point. And what's real serious about this is that even with rising criticism of what Musk is doing, Doge is doing, and Trump is allowing to happen, and his team has been put in place to implement, there has been an overall acceptance of the idea that big government's the problem. That idea has not been challenged. And also the idea that what is being carried out is being carried out against government inefficiencies. Now, the problem with that assumption, and it's one that the media doesn't question, the media's questioned the hammer-like blows that has been carried out by Elon Musk, richest man in the world. And the criticism has been more that it hasn't been surgical, you know. But the assumption that this is necessary is accepted overwhelmingly by the media. And the Democrats themselves, with the exception of the left, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and a few others, haven't really challenged that. And in part, that's because the Democrats also bought into the Reagan, statement that the problem with government is it's too big. Now, what that really meant was the problem with government was that it was carrying out a New Deal set of proposals. And that was the problem, because those New Deal proposals benefited the poor. Programs like Social Security, programs that, favored labor and unionization, and generally were designed to correct what had happened during the Depression that had brought massive poverty to the United States and throughout the world. So this assumption that big government is the problem is the first problem. And of course, with Trump's base, the assumption is that it's the deep state, and it's a state that is out to attack the needs of the people. And it operates also on the assumption that it's this government that has favored Black, brown, red, and yellow people, especially Blacks, through DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And so these have been the operating set of assumptions. And on the campaign trail, Trump made it clear that these programs and maintained through a bureaucracy of a deep state is what's taking jobs away from males, particularly white males. When 60% of those federal jobs are occupied by whites, a substantial number of them are white males, but white females as well. And the beneficiaries of DEI have been primarily white females. So this assumption that the main problem is big government is the problem, because this is a government that isn't too big for the people. It's too big if you are the people and your tax dollars are going to support big business, particularly the military industrial complex that eats up over $1 trillion of the defense of the federal budget, 840 billion formally, but when you add it all up, it's over $1 trillion. And only Social Security exceeds that, but Social Security is not an expenditure. You paid for it, but it's being treated like that. And so you're also getting out of two sides of their mouth a statement that they're going to protect Social Security while they're cutting its administration substantially, which is weakening it, which is itself designed to open it up to the charge of being inefficient, and then opening it up for privatization, which means putting it into the pockets of the rich. So the assumption is this is supposed to be an efficiency. This is a campaign to save money. In fact, first of all, very little is spent by the federal government on the people. If you take out Social Security, then in addition to Medicaid, which is the one expenditure made for the people that comes directly out of the federal budget, and it has been earmarked for a over $800 billion cut that will affect 30 million people. It will throw over 30 million people out of Medicaid, meaning out of hospitals, old folks' homes, and all the other programs that take care of poor people. So here's the deal. I'm not going into all this, all the cuts they've made and everything else, but here's the deal. While this is being portrayed as a movement for efficiency, which should mean that they're going after the Defense Department, the problem with that is Trump signed an executive order stating that the Defense Department would not be subject to cuts. Number one. So the biggest budget item is taken off the scalpel. Number two, the attacks that DOGE has carried out have been largely against small government programs. They have not gone after the big programs, particularly the Defense Department that, benefits the rich. And as I pointed out on a previous show, there have been 6 audits of the Defense Department and trillions of dollars have come up missing, and the government has done nothing to correct that because they went into the pockets of the super rich. So this is a scam. This is not about government inefficiencies. This is about government takeover, smashing those programs that benefit the poor, that benefit the disabled, that benefit Black and brown people and benefit women. And so what you're seeing with these attacks, for example, on U.S. aid, U.S. aid is less than 1% of the federal budget. So obviously, in attacking that, you're not saving any money. That was not the objective. The objective was to end a program that provides benefits for people of color throughout the world, particularly Africa, Asia, some parts of Latin America. and providing medical help for them, by providing medical help that prevents the spread of disease and a host of other things. And right as soon as they shut down that spending, which a federal judge had ordered them to continue spending what was in the pipeline, they've shut it. People started dying. And it's going to be hundreds of thousands of people that will die as a result of this program being shut off. And it is an extension of another objective of Project 2025, which is ethnic cleansing. And so we see the cleansing of any programs that benefit Black, brown, red, or yellow people, but especially Black people, through DEI initiatives that one of his first executive orders, Trump, was to declare these as illegal. And one of the first things that I pointed out in a previous show that they went and attacked was Lyndon Johnson's executive order on affirmative action. That was DEI in its beginning. DEI started through the Black Freedom Movement. It really started in California, the San Francisco Freedom Movement. When we forced employers to hire us, that was from the streets. But then what happened is the Fair Employment Practices Commission, and this is the largest state in the United States, California, was created to enforce this at the federal level. And then we see Johnson doing that with the executive order on affirmative action. Even Reagan, as racist as he was, didn't even consider eliminating affirmative action. He wanted to, but he didn't have the nerve to. You understand? So another objective of these attacks is to reverse the demographic reality of America. That's going to be by 20 years, Black, brown, red, and yellow. This is an attempt on the part of the right wing to create a government under central control that can attack anything that threatens that. And so we've seen the most important attack they've carried out on this level, in addition to erasing DEI initiatives, not only in the federal government. And notice they went after first a white woman, 4-star general in the Coast Guard, and then they went after a white 4-star, first 4-star female general to serve on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But along with that, they took out, removed as the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Brown, who's a 4-star Air Force Black general. So Elon had said prior to this, even before he donated Trump's campaign, he said, what we needed is men to run America. And he meant white men. And Trump has said so, white men. You understand? Even though he's appointed some white women, the key positions are held by white men. And we've seen the collusion of the corporate elite. And in the show that I did on Trump's inauguration, we had a picture of the people that make up the leading sector in the tech industry attending the inauguration. And leading among them is Elon Musk. In fact, the cuts they're carrying out is 6 months ahead of what they planned, because they had not planned Elon Musk in the agenda. Voight, who was their budget director, was going to carry this out in a similar but slower way. And this one is knocking out things that they don't even want to knock out, so they have to then restore some cuts. But basically, over 200,000 people have been cut so far. And the idea is to put in unqualified people who dance to Trump's tune, just like most of his cabinet. So you're seeing being put in place step by step what can amount to fascism. You were told that before the election. 85% of Blacks voted right. but we had a disturbing 22% that voted for Trump. That's disturbing. But it's nowhere near as serious as the 54% of Latino men that went for him. We'll see as they continue to be removed from the country, men and women of Latino descent. And it won't just be Latinos, it's Caribbean, especially Haitians, and others of color. And don't think it's all going after illegals. This is targeted against people of color. There's no objection to white people coming into this country. So they're trying to make America white again. So this is not an effort to save money. This is an effort to kill programs that benefit the poor, benefit Blacks and people of color. And in the case of the education department, I mean, what country in the world that has any sense is going to want a Department of Education eliminated since your power is based on knowledge? Huh? And guess what? The United States has as a crown jewel its higher educational institutions. Its public schools are in the trash can if it's for poor people because it's not being federally funded. It should be federally funded. It's funded out of your property taxes. That's about as dumb as you can get, but that's deliberate. And so if you're rich, you go past these rich public schools, they look like universities. And you go into the public schools that Blacks and people of color had, many of them have been put under privatization, where tax dollars are put into private schools, where the education is no better than the public schools and where teachers are paid less and they get no benefits. And that was another part of neoliberalism established for the purpose of privatization, you know. But in attacking the Department of Education, they're talking about, well, they're going to return this to the states. What are they going to return to the states, first of all? How much? And secondly, states' rights is the basis for slavery. States' rights, in fact, the removal of Blacks from the voting rolls and stuff and people of color, which may have accounted for Trump's victory, it was huge in numbers, that occurred at the state level, you know? So states' rights means white rights, particularly the rights of those who are in power at the state level to do with that money what they want to do. And one of the things it will mean is that funding that goes for special education, that funding that goes for handicap, that funding, you know, that goes for any kind of programs that go against racism and discrimination, those kind of programs are going to be chopped to pieces. And for a president whose public school, military academy, and Wharton School of Finance grade records are sealed, so no one will see them, we see what value he has in particular for education. I mean, look at his cabinet choices. His head of the Defense Department. I mean, give me a break. Sharing military secrets on a line that I'm no expert in computers. I could access, and I'm not interested. You want to talk about the Chinese? I mean, they can probably access their best lines anyway, but come on. Why don't you just go over and deliver it to them? And since, what is it, a week or so ago, Elon Musk was scheduled for a top briefing on foreign policy that had special implications for China. And when the New York Times revealed it, Trump backed off. But did he back off? So the other thing I would say is that when you have a government like this in charge, just as with Bush too, this was a guy who was about not as empty as Trump, but he didn't know up from down. He let his vice president run the country for the first 4 years and didn't age in those first 4 years. Then he realized that he had lost in Afghanistan and in Iraq. He started graying and then he took over. But he accelerated America's decline. So that's really what's happening here, but at the expense of the American people. So first of all, when people come and tell you, listen to what they're saying. They are out to put fascism in place. And then we have some Negroes running around talking about, oh, you're too hard on Trump, or, oh, I don't believe this. Oh, but the majority of blacks had sense, and black women had the greatest sense, but black men too. So what I'd say is that this is some very serious stuff, and you better get your head out of the sand, and you better look at what you can do to build power in your own communities, and what you can do at whatever level to resist this. And this national boycott, I think, is a good first start, and it should be supported. And it needs to be carefully organized, as I pointed out before, because if we have over $1 trillion income in this country, part of which goes into consumption, and if that is used to really hit some of these corporations that have been earmarked, it'll hurt them, because that's the objective of the boycott, is to force these companies, Target and others, who have bought into DEI to back off. But also what needs to be added is demands for jobs. And this is my specialty. I led the only movement in the country that took this on nationally. I mean, it was a local movement, but it's the only one throughout all of the national Black freedom movement, North and South, that took on economics across the board. Some local Black communities in the South did it, very hit and miss with the campaigns in the North when it came to jobs. So this is an important thing. But there have been protests against this. And it's important to see that. And in the case of the Democrats, if they do not restructure their party and reorient it along the lines of the needs of the masses of our people, and I've gone through this before, even if they win, what the Trump administration is doing is doing such a smash and burn that they think it's going to be very hard to restore what they've destroyed. So it'll take a different kind of mentality grounded in the needs of the people for that to happen. So much for that right now. But I'm telling you, this is not the time to hide your head in the sand and say, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to think about this. And I'm going to tell you, all the Afrocentrists, and I'm one, if all you're doing is studying your ancient African past and not applying it to your present, you're engaged in escapism. Because the purpose of the past is to serve the present. So you learn about your past so you can transform your present. And that's been my whole approach in everything I presented on this show. But as a warrior scholar, that's how I learned history. It was as a weapon. It wasn't just a knife. It was something to put to the heads of your oppressors and produce victories. That's what history is for, That's what your culture has been shaped for. So the topic for today was actually inspired by a book that I finished, and I've talked to you about it, and one of our viewers had recommended it, and I read it, The Fire of Freedom, Abraham Galloway, The Slave Civil War. And that picture up there is a picture of Abraham Galloway, a Black freedom fighter, ex-slave. And he had a term because he was a spy for the Union Army. He served in the Reconstruction Legislature of North Carolina and was the most popular representative and was part of the forces that fought the Ku Klux Klan and always was armed, always packed him a piece wherever he went, but not like these gangsters that you're seeing on your YouTube channel who are out here shooting everybody black in the name of money. So he had a slogan, and it was called the cartridge box and the ballot box. Now, Malcolm X had a speech. It was called The Ballot or the Bullet. And that was one of his two best speeches in form, where he was giving America an alternative, that if we got our freedom peacefully, we wouldn't have to go to the bullet, the ballot or the bullet. And then message to the grassroots. Those were the two best speeches he gave in form. But I decided to, taking Mr. Abraham Galloway's point, to update that. And so the topic of this show is the ballot box and the bullet box, whereas he called it the cartridge box, which is another term for bullets. And as opposed to Malcolm, I'm not opposed to him, but my topic today, the ballot box and the bullet box, self-defense and Black culture. This topic is revealing a thought pattern in African-American culture, whereas European culture is either or. It's the ballot or the bullet. Well, or it's good or bad, black or white, right or wrong. And if they trick you into this, they can run all kinds of scams on you, because nothing is all one way. You know what I mean? As the African-American folk saying says, in the best of us, there's bad. In the worst of us, there's good. So the African mentality, and this gets to more than this topic that I got right here, but to the very core of the subject that we're covering today, the African mindset is twin. Good is bad. It's just a question of which predominates. Is it more good than bad? You understand? The blues are the spirituals. The spiritual blues, are both the blues and the spirituals, because you don't separate God from freedom. And Black people didn't. And so the spiritual blues, it's the spirituals because it's about the spirit. But it's the blues because it's about what's going on here on earth. And when this beautiful art form was created, founded on the spiritual blues, we were catching hell. And so it wasn't like every day was Sunday or everything was nice. It ain't to this day. But it was pure living hell most of the time. But the spiritual blues captured both sides, the spirit and the blues, the political and the spiritual. Our culture is ingrained in that. Now, we have been infected by the Euro-American, European, Aryan culture of good or bad. And that's a Platonic reference. He creates these categories where it's one or the other to create hierarchy. So he has the good in command of everything else. And for him, it was reason devoid of intuition. The masculine devoid of the feminine, which has been basically the Greek Aryan, and right now the Trump project. And most white women who voted have gone along with it. So that's your problem, you know, because you are signing off on your own oppression. So if that's what you want to do, go right ahead. So the ballot box and the bullet box, what it's suggesting is these are not either or. And in fact, in this age, if you want to protect one, you better have the other. And during enslavement, and particularly the end of enslavement, during the Reconstruction era, where blacks gained the right to vote after a period of time, the only way they're going to keep it was through the bullet box. So if people think that one is contradicting the other, well, that's an either or thought pattern. That ain't how it really works. You know what I mean? So, and then that's tied to the self-defense traditions that are central to African-American culture. The whole purpose of these shows, the ones that I did 3 weeks ago on African-American culture and its foundation, and then the last two that we replayed with Dr. Akinyele Umoja on armed self-defense movements in the South in the 60s, was to show that our culture has certain groundings, certain foundations. And so in the first of this 3-part series, and 2 of them wasn't a part of the series, but I brought them in because those topics fit, because they had been done 4 years ago with Akinyele Umoja on his book, We'll Shoot Back. We're in an era of a choice between 2 cultures. And I've gone through this before. And it defines really the challenges that face our communities, the choice between a new African or African-American or Black culture and Euro-American culture. During enslavement, we didn't face that. We faced an attempt to attack our culture, and we stood up and recreated a new African culture founded on African principles, with new African principles added and with slave residuals, negatives coming out of slavery that we have to constantly work on and eject. But fundamentally, this was a new African culture. So we didn't have people running around except for maybe a few demented house slaves who were thinking about embracing a culture that had chains on their wrists, on their legs, but could not enshackle our minds contrary to popular opinion. I've gone through a lot of this before. So the purpose of these shows has been to enable us to look at this rich past that we have, that we brought into America and the Americas. I'm focusing on the US, but this same stuff applies to the Caribbean and South America and Africans in in Europe. So that in the face of these attacks that we're facing right now, and the African world is facing, and by the way, the Caribbean has been given a mandate by Trump to cut off from Cuba. That's been their mandate. And CARICOM, which is the Union of Caribbean States, had a meeting with Marco Rubio, chaired by CARICOM, by the Prime Minister of Barbados, who was one of the best leaders on the whole green planet. And they let him know, we're not cutting ties with Cuba. Cuba provides medical care for most of the Caribbean. You want us to send them home so we can die, just like, she didn't say this, I'm saying this, so that just like what you've done with USAID can happen here. They've done good for us. You know what I mean? Right on to the Caribbean. And Rubio had to kind of step back. Now we'll see what happens next. But they're providing a unified front That's a good sign. Right on. Caribbean, stand up for your people against a mess coming from this country. So the first of these three-part shows, two of which were older shows with Akinyele Umoja, was entitled African American Culture Based on an African Cultural Foundation. So that show was designed to go into the period in which Africans were first coming into this country to show what they brought. Because, and I'm not going back through that show to argue for, that our culture continued and all the rest of that stuff. That's what I covered there. I've covered it before. But the point is that show focused heavily on the Bambara people and what they contributed in terms of the warrior tradition coming out of Africa into the U.S., focusing heavily on Louisiana. And there were some other African cultures covered as well, but Bambara was key. So the following shows, when we dealt with Dr. Akinyele Umoja, who's been a friend of mine for over 50 years, a scholar and an activist, a revolutionary, was to look at self-defense traditions in the context of Africa, what was carried from Africa to America, and then in the context, the second show, of the Black Freedom Movement, with an emphasis on self-defense in the Black Freedom Movement, and a heavy influence or emphasis on the Deacons for Self-Defense, but others as well. So all of that was to get us to have a better understanding of our cultural choices by understanding the foundation, the root. If you're going to understand anything, you want to understand the root of something, the root of a tree, the root of a people. And so in this case, the root of new African culture. And so this, in the explanation of this show, it states that this show will be covering the trilineal traditions and African and African-American secret societies, divination systems, Black families, and Black self-defense organizations coming out of Sierra Leone during the period of enslavement, and then it expressed through Black Reconstruction and Black freedom and Black power movements coming out of this country. Yeah, Yvette, this country has negatively affected the world. That's true. And we're in a key point that we occupy in the center of this octopus. So yes, and it's definitely affected us, and we've affected them too. So that was the purpose of those, is to look at our culture. In this particular case, looking at its foundation and what were the elements that went into its foundation as the basis for understanding its nature. So what I want to do today is to do a number of things. They're going to all be mixed up like gumbo. I want to look at what the region of Africa that is today called and was then called Sierra Leone and Liberia, but especially Sierra Leone, what it contributed to the formation of African American culture or new African culture in this country today. Now, the Africans coming from Sierra Leone made up 16.6% of the Africans coming into this country. And again, this old saying of, we lost our culture in America. We don't have a culture, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Oh, please. It's the most long-lasting, enduring, complex, beautiful culture in the history of the world. And at one time, it was the culture of the whole world. That'll be the subject of my 8th book. And so you think that just getting off a boat is going to erase it? You think that just the terror of slavery is going to erase it? Do you think that people who were enslavers, who were primarily focused on money and power and evil, do you think they were even equipped with understanding this culture, let alone carrying out the systematic culture that they're given credit, attack on the culture that they're given credit for in the Willie Lynch bull that we've seen coming from some of our ill-informed leaders? And some of us want to hang on to Willie Lynch because we want to believe that. And since when was a slave master called Lynch before lynching happened? I mean, that's, I covered this before. That was a myth. And one of our great scholars, exposed it and wrote a book on it. And some of us don't even want to read it. You know what I mean? So you need to know your roots if you're going to know the fruit. The fruit is now, and we're in an era now where we need to know as much about us as possible so that we can draw from the strengths that reside within us. And we do it often unconsciously, but when someone else is putting their culture on you, and then you're not really conscious of what your culture is and what it's based on, then when you start losing it, you might not even know what you've lost. You know what I mean? And some of us are becoming mental Europeans. Some of us have become so attached to money and power that we forgot about everything else. And in fact, the biggest narratives that you're seeing on TV are gangster narratives. They're not narratives on the heroes among our people. Every now and then we'll get a film on Malcolm X, you know what I mean? Or Muhammad Ali, or some other great figure, Harriet Tubman. But that's every now and then. But you're being fed gangsterism all the time. And now it's sitting in the White House. And you got some of those who have the gangster ethos supporting it. You know what I'm talking about. Or among whom I'm talking about. So what I want to focus on specifically is the role of Senegal, especially in contributing to some of the founding principles of African American culture. What I want to say is this: what they contributed, a lot of other African cultures also contributed. But because of their numbers and stuff, they had a particular role in the culture that was especially important. But when you add to the fact that African cultures are a unity, they have more in common than separates them, then what you have at the same time is a preponderance of similar cultural influences that are going to have an overwhelming effect. And that's one of the main reasons why these cultures could blend over a period of time. So I'm going to start this in a slightly different way. Rather than going first to Sierra Leone, I want to deal with the present. And not the present, but the more recent present than, say, Sierra Leone in the 16th century. Hey, Felicia. Well. By the way, Felicia Harden just tapped in, and she is one of the two people who head up Hoppy. And they're taking a trip to both Ghana with my good friend James Smalls, and then Kemet, and they've been taking Kemet trips. But Felicia, I really want to thank you for the way you plugged the series we did on Trumpism and neoliberalism. That was very nice. Thank you, lady. This is one of my buddies here. That's a nice picture. She sent me a nice picture of her, Brother Kaba, James Smalls, and others. They had a conference in New York where Kaba and some others spoke. Smalls came out to hear it. And she's up there grinning with a smile so big it covered almost her whole face. You know what I mean? So this is one of my favorite ladies, who, by the way, was born on the same day as my wife. Ain't that funny? Just younger. Uh-huh. So what I want to do is in getting into this subject of how African culture served as a foundation for the formation of African American culture, particularly Sierra Leone in this case, I want to start with the period right after enslavement, Reconstruction. There's a period right after slavery. Most people don't know this, but right after slavery, the Klan rode stronger than almost any time. In fact, it did. It ran stronger than any time in their history, unchecked, because the federal government was operating on the assumption that, you could trust these white people to, go back to accepting blacks as free and accepting the fact that they were defeated largely by 180,000 black people and, the rest of the Union Army and General Grant, who led it and who had great respect for his black soldiers, But they came to find out the Klan was riding almost the minute after slavery was abolished. And so it took some time for the Congress and then for state legislatures in the South to realize that the only defense that Reconstruction governments had was black people, that they could not have anyone or hardly anyone that was white in these militias. If they had to be abolitionists that were sincerely committed to the liberation of black people and supported emancipation and all this kind of stuff. And they usually had been a part of the Civil War and in the Union Army. So the first thing I want to note is when we're looking at Sierra Leone's influence, and it's true of other African cultures as well, the way in which Africans responded in this country to Ku Klux Klan violence, and this violence was described by grassroots blacks as bulldozing. Bulldozing meant that they go in and burn you alive. They go in and lynch you, rape you, shoot you, hang you, chop your heads off, all this kind of stuff. And so the Klan was riding. Bedford Forrest didn't organize the Klan. He didn't start it. It was another general in the Confederate Army that started it, but Bedford Forrest came in as a primary organizer, and he was an organizer of guerrilla warfare because he was a vicious Confederate general who rode on horseback and, carried out his attacks. But at Fort Pillow, carried out a major massacre of black of black soldiers, and was a real savage. And so this is what happens. And so finally, North and Southern Reconstruction governments recognize they're going to have to arm blacks. And the three most important areas was Mississippi, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Why? A majority of those states were black. Did you know that? Huh? And so can you imagine the sight for white people or black people in uniforms? This is after the Civil War, with their rifles, marching in formation and, being in a position to shoot up the Klan. And so this was the first thing. And by the way, sisters demanded that brothers join the Klan. And you didn't have join the militia. You didn't have to convince them. The majority of black men wanted to. But if they didn't, they were ostracized by the sisters. The sisters didn't want nothing to do with them. You hear me? Nothing to do with them. And of course, there was one thing that especially they would deny, but they would pretty well deny them any place in the household. But most men, black men, look forward to this. You hear me? They look forward to this. And one, they had a rifle, which was often taken away from them after the Civil War to defend their communities. Secondly, they got paid. And that meant it would supplement that sharecropping stuff, in some cases take the place of it. So they were very proud to have that gun, that rifle, with a lot of ammunition, the ballot box and the bullet box. You got to have some boxes full of bullets. It's just not good enough to have a gun, and not a gun, just a rifle. And they had those repeating rifles. You know what I mean? And then, of course, their women were very proud of them, and they would come out and all of this kind of stuff. So the first thing is the Klan had to face that. There was more to that. I'll cover it later than this. But the Black militia movement and the willingness of Blacks to fight was a manifestation of a warrior tradition carried from Africa to America. But this is the key point. And this, most historians don't know this. The Klan feared the militias, but they feared more secret societies. And that's the subject of what I'm covering today. African secret societies. The book I'm finishing on Seba and Sodiah, a major part of it is African secret societies carried to the U.S. and the Caribbean, but focusing largely on the U.S. But the same thing applied to the Caribbean and South America. And so they feared the militias, but they feared the secret societies even more. And I should say this, many militia members were members of secret societies. And when I close this on the 60s, you'll see again why. So why is it that they feared the secret societies even more than militias? They were secret. They were a continuation of the most important society that Africans carried from Africa into the United States, into the Caribbean. And they relied solely on Black folks. There ain't no white people in those secret societies. You understand? And because they were secret, you didn't know what the holy hell they were doing, and you didn't know who they were. You hear me? And as Akinyele Umoja pointed out in the last two of the series that we've had on armed self-defense, these secret societies were sustained by oaths. People took oaths, O-A-T-H-S. But there's much more to this than oaths. So they knew that when they were going up against any group of Blacks who came out of secret societies, you're dealing with a fierceness the likes of which you have never faced before. Because I pointed out in the show, the first of this series, are the Bambara. The Bambara in the kingdom of Segu, which was a warrior kingdom of the Bambara, and Malcolm's grandfather, in all likelihood, Ajar, was a Bambara, 6'4", as most of Malcolm's family members were, and a warrior master builder. They were usually warrior cultivators, agriculturalists. But in Malcolm's great-great-great-grandfather's case, Ajar, he was a warrior and a master builder. He wasn't a carpenter. And Malcolm's father had that same thing. But he also passed on the warrior spirit to Malcolm's uncles, grandparents, and father, and himself. You hear me? And his sister, because Ella was a fighter in and of herself. James Smalls was a security person for her. So they feared these secret societies, as they should have and should. These secret societies, and I'm going to go into them in a minute, were also tied to the Per Ankh system in Kemet, which means house of life. They were mystery systems. They were also secret. And in fact, the mystery systems of Kemet grow out of these ancient African systems, though some of them precede the secret societies. Because you're going to see in a minute, the secret societies have a particular time sequence to them when they were formed. They were formed out of specific needs. And by the way, I see you saying, Wolf Manlow, oaths tie you to your roots. They tie you to your roots, if you got oath values. If you're one of these Negroes out here whose word doesn't mean anything, who'll say one thing and do another, you know what I mean? Who has fishbone for backbone, who doesn't have the courage to fight their oppressors, but will blow another black person away in a minute. You understand? An oath doesn't mean 2 cents. And if you get them taking oaths in gangs, forget it. You hear me? Oaths only mean something when there's honor in a person, when their word and their being are the same. All black people have this, and some younger black people have this, but it depends on character and it depends on identity. Who do you place first and what do you place first? So they feared, the KKK and other right-wing groups feared the secret societies because of what was underneath them. And it was these secret societies carried into the US during enslavement that would come out later, and we would see them later. So in the case of Sierra Leone, and Liberia are 2 of the places in which a significant number of African people came. 16.6% of Africans, as I just pointed out, came to the US from Sierra Leone. Now, in the case of Sierra Leone and Liberia, the societies that the people of Sierra Leone and Liberia had, they were not on the order of what you like to identify with. Most blacks like to identify the big societies with kings, with big armies and stuff like this. These were smaller societies, agrarian. One of the key products produced in these agrarian societies, as was true of the Senegambian region, which the Bambara came from, was rice. So they cultivated rice, but they cultivated a lot of other crops, as well as they had skilled crafts and in iron working and in other things. But the societies that they had, they came out of small, classless, age grade societies. And I've covered this before in talking about how societies moved from hunter-gatherer 149,000 years ago to about 10,000 BC when there's a transition to agriculture. And then you have the twin lineal system of male-female balance transferred into agricultural systems. So it wasn't just hunter-gatherer systems. And the first ones were these small societies. So in Sierra Leone and in Liberia, these were age grade societies. And I've covered this before. You go back and look at some of the shows I've had before where people in certain ages assume certain responsibilities. And it covers the whole gamut from the very young to the very old. And each of these groupings have a social system for that age group, with older people carrying more authority up to a point, and younger people at a certain point providing the warriors that protect the society. So this is a key feature of these societies. They were classless, age grade societies. These societies are heavily democratic. And so while you'll have the hierarchical societies of the Asante, for example, who bring in, those are people from Ghana, the area that we call Ghana today, the Akan people and others, they come out of structured societies with kings and queens and stuff. And so in the discussion with Akinyele Umoja, he had an interesting observation on this. His observation was that as slavery and colonialism hit Africa, then some of these small societies had to reorganize and become more militaristic and more hierarchical, structured from top to bottom. And while there's truth in that, It's also true that a society like the Akan, while they became hierarchical, and there's a history of this, I won't go into it here, that at its base, it remained twinlineal. And at its top, it did as well, having a king and queen mother representing both the masculine and feminine principle, but inclining more to the males because they had entered a period of warfare. And so at the bottom, which is the lineage and the families, what you have is a twinlineal family system where there's an interaction between males and females. At the lineage level, women had ruled at one point lineages, which is a larger family organization of related blood, related kinsmen and women. At one point, the women ran this. And then at another point, a man did. But it was a lineage, the lineage council that governed the lineage was made up of males and females. And the lineage head was the most just, best man in terms of manly qualities, human qualities, the one that didn't lie, disrespect women, and so forth. But he was a first among equals. It was the lineage that made the decision. So while it's true that when slavery hits Africa, and in this particular case, West Africa, some of these classless democratic societies have to become more hierarchical. Many continued to remain non-hierarchical and formed larger coalitions with these smaller age grade societies. But in either case, whether you have hierarchy like the Akan or you have classless age grade societies like the people from Senegal or Sierra Leone that I'll be dealing with today, either way, the twinlineal feature is central, meaning male-female equal empowerment, either way. So democracy is coming in both ways. But the difference with the ones with kings and queens is they have the authority to order certain things in warfare and other things that wouldn't be the case with these decentralized societies. So a key thing to stress here, a key feature of African-American culture is democracy. We have to have a say-so. It's a constituent part of our nature. We have to have a say-so. And the art forms that we have created are democratic as well. Improvisation is itself, particularly group improvisation, is a democratic act, you know? And these smaller societies had the best living standards because the people ran them. You understand? So what you find is then in Sierra Leone, you had male-female system that I call twinlineal, where your lineage comes through, that is who you inherit from, comes through both male and female lines, and where decision-making is male and female. Sometimes the females making decisions for females, males making decisions for males, and then in groups, males and females making decisions for each other. This is the big great breakthrough of the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And by the way, it contains the basic formation of how to reconstruct this society, Africa, the Caribbean, or wherever else we are in the world, starting with your communities. So these secret societies were extremely important. In the case of Kemet, the Perunk system was a system of education through which the culture was passed on in Kemet. But we'll see there's an important distinction between how it worked in Kemet and how it worked in Sierra Leone and other parts of Africa. I pointed this out before. In Kemet, the Perunk or the mystery system was for the purpose of training every skill set except warriors. They were trained in the palace of the pharaoh. But in the case of Africa, the secret societies trained warriors as well. So it was a total training system because in this case, particularly in the 9 hierarchical systems, the control was in the hands of the people. So military training would be in the hands of the people. Are you getting this? So there were certain ethnic groups that made up the people of Sierra Leone, and I'll give you the dates for these later, and Liberia. They were the Mandi people, M-A-N-D-E. They were Mandi speakers. They were also called Mandinka. They were the Susu people, the Jolonke people, the Loko, L-O-K-O, the Karanko people, the Vai people, and the Kono people. And then there were non-Mande people, and they were called Timni, Landuma, and Butom, as well as Sherbro and Kim. Now, they all shared a basic common cultural unity. They spoke slightly different languages and had maybe a different name for God, but basically their culture was very similar, democratic and trilineal. So it's important to understand this. And what I want to say is we have misconceptions about ethnic groups called tribes. We tend to resent that. I see people who are Afrocentric. When you say tribe, they stiffen up, like that's a bad thing. Because we've been sold a bill of goods coming from Western historians that tribes are a bad thing. Now, in fact, the European, whether you want to call the European nation state, that's a tribe. The Chinese are made up of tribes. You hear me? Native Americans were organized according to that. They may not have used the term, but tribes, the Jews, tribes. And we're running around here having trouble with that. And see, that's why Africa's in trouble. I pointed this out before, because at the point of independence, Africans chose the European tribal system of government based on John Locke's second treatise of government, which says that government is for the purpose of protecting private property. And that's what's happening with this rape of the government right now. This is all designed to take what's left of the wealth that the few had, that the majority have, and put it in the pockets of the few. But the system's set up for that. Africans had no such conception. You hear me? Because their ethnic systems were just. So if you want to say you like the pharaoh system of Kemet, but you don't like tribes, well, let me tell you something. The best governance systems that Africa's had wasn't the pharaohs. It was at structured hierarchical governments. It's the Asante, Asantehene, Asantewaa. Why? Because it was not based on royal incest. It wasn't based on genes, period. You didn't inherit your office because your father was pharaoh. In the case of, the Akan, your father was Asantewaa, Asantehene. You didn't inherit that because the person picked to be Asantehene was the one that never lied, the one that never cheated, the one that was brave, the one that never turned his back on a war party, the one that never cursed, the one that respected women. Huh? Best man. But when you get the Western system, you get the worst man system, and you're seeing it right now. The worst man system. The bad man system. You hear me? So don't be talking about, you don't want to hear about all these groups and stuff. And yeah, they had some conflicts. They were minor. And yes, the Europeans took advantage of it. Yeah, that's all true. But guess what? When the European hits Africa, they had just settled tribal wars that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. The War of the Roses, the 10-Year War, all these different wars. You hear me? It just so happened when they start moving into Africa, those wars had largely been settled. I don't see you talking about, or at least those who have this critique of tribes, having a critique of the European tribes. And that's the one we took up on. And we're imitating and not questioning. All of Africa is governed by the European nation state model. And that model keeps the people out of the picture. The people don't have a say so. And the main ones they keep out of the picture is women. You hear me? So you're going to see as I deal with these secret societies, why they're so important for men and women, but especially for women. So it must be admitted that between the 16th to the 18th century, these little conflicts that were occurring between some of these ethnic groups made them more vulnerable to the intrusion of the Portuguese who came in the 16th century, to the Dutch and English who came in the 17th century, and to the French who came in the 18th century. But the main vulnerability of Africa was to this bullet box and guns. They didn't have them. We did have some Africans who were metal workers who made their own guns, but they shot only a short range, and they were full of smoke and stuff. You could hardly see what they were doing. They didn't have time to innovate on that. And part of the reason is Africa was kind of shut off from some of the things going on in the world at that time that was innovating stuff, just as China was shut off from this by the 19th century, because their emperors had decided around the 11th, 12th century to shut China off from the world, and they were the most powerful nation on the planet at that point. And their arrogance and their insular thinking led them to lose contact with the rest of the world. Now, the Chinese gave birth to gunpowder, the printing press, and a few other things. But the Europeans began to take that gunpowder and use it as a technique for power and control. The Chinese had used it for siege weapons as cannons, but they had never introduced it systematically into their military because they didn't have to. They weren't going up against powers that had those kind of weapons. And they, their emperors were into building great palaces and all the rest of this stuff. You know what I mean? So there's a lesson here, and the lesson is you don't just study your history. You need to know what's going on in the world. And whatever is good that you can use, adapt it to your own situation. My two books, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1 and 2, that took me 10 years to write, almost 1,000 pages. First draft was my experience. Second draft was my people's experience, because I had 30 years then, I got 66 now. And then the third draft was the world. And I had a computer, so I could just go cut and paste and add stuff and all that kind of stuff, because computers were just coming in. Book came out in the 90s, 1990. But the point is, if the Vietnamese had something, and they did, I incorporated it into my strategies and tactics. Guess what? That's what your enemy does. Anybody with any sense does. China is now rivaling America as a second strongest nation, period, but the greatest industrial power on the planet right now, producing more engineers and everything else, while America's shutting down its education department. I'm sure the Chinese are grinning. Going through neoliberalism, which I've heard a few politicians admit was a mistake here, but for the most part, they don't, because that's what's being carried out now. It's neoliberalism. Privatize everything. And the Chinese are not doing that. They've taken 1 billion people out of poverty. But the main thing is they modernize their country in less than 30 years. And I've studied their modernization, and I'm doing a restudy of it. And the principal person that orchestrated this modernization was this guy right here, Deng Xiaoping. Barely 5 feet tall. If you think size has anything to do with greatness, well, that's a big fat mistake. He orchestrated the modernization of a country which in 1970, The average income of a Chinese person was $44 a year. To where right now, it is the superpower of the world. Its economy is displacing America all over the world without firing a shot. And America's firing shots and losing wars and now playing games with their people's government that is going to further reduce their power, making friends into enemies. Canada and Mexico are the two major trading partners for the United States. America ripped off half of Mexico and calls them, when they come in here now and they're deporting them, aliens. And between the two of them, that's where most of America gets its profit in trade. The North American Free Trade Agreement was between those three countries and revised later by Trump. And now, he's putting a 25% tariff on everybody and talking about he wants Canada to be the 51st state. No Canadian in their right mind would want to be a part of the United States. So they can get ripped off the way we are, so they can have no medical care the way this country does, and Canada, cares for its people medically and other ways, and basically lives peacefully, but has been supportive of the United States. So what kind of stuff is this? So Africa got kind of caught in a technology transfer thing, and we weren't ready. That was the biggest problem. And there were other reasons for this, but that gunpowder was the biggest problem, and guns. If you had guns, if you didn't have the manufacturing capacity to make gunpowder, you were in trouble. So, and not just any guns, but the most up-to-date, which became the Gatling gun, which was the machine gun. That one makes warfare very unfair if you don't have it. So, interethnic conflict provided an opportunity. These societies were smaller, but they could have done better in resisting European incursion had they had some more up-to-date methods that they could use. But Africa did quite well in resisting European aggression for 100 years. It took 100 years for them to take the continent down, and they could not genocide all of us as they did some other people throughout the world. But it was rough. But technology was a big part of that. Now, among the Senegambian people, the organization politically was the village. And it usually consisted of an amalgamation of several villages. And that made up their basic unit of government. And again, government that was run by the people. Their family system was twinlineal. It was based on a masculine, feminine, male-female system, inclining towards the male. But women played an extremely important part in Sierra Leonean society, and due first to the twinlineal makeup of African culture, and secondly, due to secret societies. African women played a central role in secret societies, African secret societies. Now, the two most powerful secret societies, one made up of men, the other of women, for men was the Poro Society. That was the largest of the secret societies throughout Africa. It's another reason why I'm focusing on Sierra Leone, because while secret societies are found throughout Africa, this was the largest. And that was the male secret society. And then the Bundu, B-U-N-D-U, secret society was a secret society for males. The Poro is spelled P-O-R-O. So what role did the secret societies play? Now, see, most scholars on this don't know this. They have some general ideas, and I'll give you the general ones. But the main role of secret societies was this. In a period of enslavement and then later colonialism, The main role of secret societies was to perpetuate traditional African culture, because with the coming of the European, with warfare, with their imposing of their political and economic systems, the first thing they sought to do was to supplant traditional African education. That was the first thing they sought to replace. And so the secret societies served many roles, but the most important was the continuation of traditional African culture by inculcating that culture into our youth, male and female. That was the most important role that they played. But they also played a social role, because it's through males and females joining secret societies that they become initiated into manhood and womanhood. And a girl can't marry unless she's gone through secret societies. A man can't marry unless he's gone through secret societies, because they will not have made the transition from boyhood to manhood, from girlhood to womanhood, motherhood and fatherhood. These were governmental systems. Now, you had traditional African government, and then you had secret societies. The secret societies were the ones who could hold a chief or a king in check. If a king was violating traditional law, it's the secret societies that would secretly come in at night and kill him or remove him from office. This didn't normally happen under the older traditional systems, because you had your own checks and balances, and kings were also removed through traditional ways. For example, the Yoruba, if an Oba, who was king, received a bowl with the parrot feather in it, it meant kill yourself, because they had given you 3 warnings to follow the king's counsel and you hadn't. So now you must take yourself out. But if you don't, secret society will do it for you. And at night, people could sometimes hear, people screaming, This was no arbitrary gangster stuff. This was the enforcement of law. So you want to talk about a policeman? They didn't have jails and stuff, but they had them some secret societies, baby. You hear me? And they were enforced. So secret societies were governmental institutions. There were checks on anything going wrong with the regular government. They served as police agencies and initiatory systems for boys and girls, carrying them to men and women. So for women, the Bundu Society was also called Sande, S-A-N-D-E. And the Sande Society was extremely important. It played a very important role in the lives of women. The Sande Society was a society in which women were organized into lodges. So if a sister, a young girl, because generally the females entered the Bundu or Sande Society at the age of around 14, males did as well in the Poro Society. And once they'd gone through initiation, they might marry and move with their husbands, or somewhere else. They might move for another reason. Then they just transfer their lodge membership to that new community they were a part of. And these secret societies, both male and female, operated on the local level in towns and villages. And they were independent. They were under the control of their members. No one had any control over them. So this is extremely important. The most secret of the secret societies were the societies of women. They were more secret than the societies of men. And by the way, there's always one woman who belonged to the men's secret society, every one of them, but there wasn't a single man in a woman's secret society. Y'all brothers know about the Big Mama tradition that John Henry Clark talked about. A lot of you were raised under it. Big Mama in charge. You know what I mean? In my case, it was both, but the raising was done mainly by my mother, you know. But my mother and father were two equal powers, but she was the one doing the socialization. My father worked two jobs. My mother worked on us and then ran a preschool after we were grown, academic preschool for 40 years, you know. So the Big Mama tradition is something that we're familiar with. Am I telling the truth out there? Huh? So sisters had major say-so. They ran these lodges. Now, the person that was in charge was an older woman, and older women in general, but an older woman. And the whole initiation, because the whole point of these secret societies, the most important thing was to initiate males and females from boyhood and girlhood to manhood and womanhood. And so you want, and this is true of the male secret societies as well, you want women and men who have transitioned through the various stages of life so that they can impart this in the education of the younger girls and then the younger women. And over time, they can do the same thing. So you had a system of education where, as I pointed out before, to know something, you had to be it. To know the truth, you had to be the truth. And initiation was the key route. And so in the case of men, circumcision was key. That was a key rites of passage. But there were other things that you had to go through before that. Excision was for women, and that's something that's being frowned on today because of the damage that it does to females. But the fact is that in the initiation of males and females, they were told when they entered the secret societies of Bundu and Poro, they would die. I've said this before. Many of them believed it, and some did, because the trials were rough. They were rough. Those trials prepared Africans. That was not their purpose for the Middle Passage. Those trials prepared Africans for the trials of enslavement. Those trials that they went through initiation prepared them for what they would face as they resisted enslavement. Gave them a spirit of resistance. And virtually every African that came to the Western Hemisphere, including the United States, except for babies, and very few of them were brought over as babies, be hard for them to survive the Middle Passage, they had been initiated. Males and females were rough and tough. Some died in initiation, but most of them died in the state of not being men or women and growing into manhood and womanhood on multiple levels. So it was this system that was carried to the Americas and particular to the United States. Now I want to say something I've heard no historian say on this. One of the key things, partially this part people know, that the secret societies, of course, had a center, and it was the spirit systems. You call them religion. They were not religious systems. They were spirit systems. So all African systems are spirit systems. I've gone through this before. And so that's key in secret society systems. On the plantation, divination remained a major institution practiced by diviners who had been priests in Africa, or priestess. There were males and females. And so the common assumption is, because this is what the slave narratives say, that the main purpose of divination was for enslaved Africans to determine whether or not they're going to be whipped and to avoid whippings. That's what you call putting people in the wool. In other words, when you hear Africans saying that the primary role of something is one thing, and everybody's saying the same thing, they're all singing out of the same hymn book, you better know some wool is being pulled over people's eyes. That was certainly one of the purposes of divination, because divination is where a priest is going to divine your future. And a good one does that. I'm into Ifa. My Babalao has done much divining for me. I've talked about a few of them, and I'm alive because of at least one of his divinations. And I, took it serious and did what he told me to do, but mainly it's what he did, because I wouldn't be here but for that. But I am asserting that one of the ways in which secret societies were maintained during slavery was through divination, because the leader on every plantation were the diviners. There were other leaders, but they were the main leaders. And so divination played a very important role in perpetuating the secret society systems in the United States. And we know they're perpetuated because we don't see any evidence of them in slavery because they're secret. But we see evidence of them when slavery is over. I've gone through this in some other shows. And in the discussion with Akinyele Umoja, we had some discussion on this. Secret societies were the main building block of communities at the end of enslavement. Akinyele Umoja brought out in his discussion a very important point, that groups like the Deacons had not been penetrated by the FBI. And he said a lot of the reasons, one was that they knew each other. And then mine was they came out of more whole communities where, Southern Blacks are more African. Their word means something, all the rest of the stuff. But they knew everybody that was coming in. And they were required to take an oath. But the key point he was making was what made these, the Deacons so strong in their self-defense thing was they had a commitment that was sustained by secret society principles. And so self-defense, when it worked best, worked when it came out of these institutions. In a previous show, a long time ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I pointed out that the secret society organizations among free men and women of color, sustained through enslavement and carried from Africa, are the oldest organizational structure that Blacks have in the United States. It's also true in the Caribbean and South America. And the most long-lasting, some of them are maintained through Masonic orders and stuff, and others through independent groups formed by Africans on their own. But the key point is they're formed for the same purpose as the secret societies of Africa. And because they're total, they deal with the spiritual, the political, the social, the economic. They deal with all phases of life. They have had the most long-lasting effect on Blacks. They need to be revived in a stronger form today. So these secret societies have been key in us building institutions. Our biggest economic institutions came out of secret societies, burial societies, because the African believes in the life after death. All Black people have always made the point of taking out insurance policies to, take care of their death benefits, because they're concerned about being sent to the next life, the afterworld, in style. You know what I mean? And so a lot of the secret societies that form in the beginning of Black communities coming out of enslavement, and I've gone through some of this before, these started off as burial societies, and then they become insurance companies, and they become multi-$100 million insurance companies. And I pointed this out before. I was speaking in Los Angeles on Malcolm X years ago, and I went to a reception afterwards, and one of the people at the reception was a part of the family that had founded one of the largest black insurance companies in the United States. And an inspiration came from a dream. Huh? So the spirit part of this. So the secret society has been like at the backbone of what we have put together as a people. Now, today, we have the task of rebuilding Black communities. And please believe me, this period we're going through right now ain't no nice period, and it's going to get worse. And so we need to be in a better position to handle this. And so these traditions are very important. So in looking in the recent past, we were looking at the deacons. In the second show, it was focused heavily on the deacons, some in the first, but in the second. And I was explaining to Akinyele Umoja that when I was in Bogalusa, Louisiana, which formed their deacons chapter, it was the second chapter formed by the deacons. And I was in a freedom house waiting for the Klan. My girlfriend had brought me a pistol, and I was waiting to shoot it out with the Klan. My girlfriend, Virginia Burton, former chair of Berkeley Corps, she's in heaven now. Lovely sister. Fellow Leo, too. Drove all the way from Berkeley to see that her man had a gun. You know what I mean? I was like, go on, girl. She just didn't let me keep it. After I came back, I had to give it back to her. Bank of America, Smith & Wesson, nickel-plated 38 special. I just beat the Bank of America. I mean, that should have been a gift. You should have let me keep that. But I had it for what I needed it for. And I'm laying on the floor. And what is the brother telling me? This is true for Bogalusa, Louisiana. That the reason that Blacks formed the deacons, and I've said this before, but I'm now stressing this in a new context, the main reason is the sisters told them to. Huh? This is again the twin lineal tradition of secret societies. You get this? Huh? The sisters were saying, brothers, pick up your shotguns, your carbines, your various MK, whatever you got, and protect us. And in fact, the founder of the deacons in Bogalusa, Louisiana, in fact, his picture is on the cover of this book on the Deacons for Defense, this leaflet on the Deacons for Defense. That's the brother who was with his hands raised up, that little orange around him. He was a judo master in the military and an arms specialist. And wherever he went, he had a truckload of automatic rifles, pistols, whole lot of ammunition, and hand grenades. The deacons were so bad that when the Klan faced them, it was like, hey, let's get the hell out of here. You hear me? And they had some shootouts too. But they were all military trained. Now, when we were talking to Akinyele Umoja, when I did the interview, it wasn't an interview, it was a conversation with him. He made the point that most of the members of the deacons had a military background. So that was one. They not only knew each other, but in addition, the deacons required that their members be married. They wanted responsible men who had families to take care of. And Chilly Willie, Ernest Thomas, who I knew, who was one of the founders of the deacons, his requirement was that they also be stable, that they be people that are disciplined and don't fly off and get out of control. You understand? So these deacons were about seriousness. And what's important about the deacons is the deacons organized, one, in the case of Bogalusa, to defend the Black community and defend families. And of course, they were deacons in the church, some of them. But they form alongside of their involvement with CORE. And that was extremely important because CORE had picked Louisiana as a place where they would carry out a major campaign. CORE also was in Mississippi with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, in CORE, the founders of CORE, like James Farmer, they were believers in nonviolence as a way of life. They were also into integration. Farmer was married to a white woman. He was a very good person, and without him, we wouldn't have had the freedom rides. CORE wouldn't have been on the national map. But some of us, like me, I'm ex-Marine. I'm coming out of the Marine Corps, and I'm, brainwashed, but then I wake up in the movement. But the one thing I did know how to do was shoot. I was the best Marine in my unit. Lieutenant Colonel in the ROTC got the award of best cadet in the ROTC. I try to be the best at whatever I do. And I love shooting, and I loved uniforms. I was just in the wrong uniform. So people like me coming into the movement and many others, we came into CORE because it was a national organization and it was committed to Black freedom. And in San Francisco, it gave us a vehicle for organizing a mass movement. But the majority of my members, they had military backgrounds, many of them. John Handy, as I pointed out to you before, wasn't military, but he was a boxer, a champion, lightweight boxer. John Handy, a great jazz musician. There's a brother named Tomato Scott, who's my father's age. He considered himself like a spiritual father to me. He gave me advice on women. Every woman was no good. Don't leave. Don't do this one. Don't do that. He had his own women stashed away, only one at a time. But he was a security person, so he was very mysterious. You never got to see where he lived, all that kind of stuff. But he was in World War II, and he was a boxer also. So the majority of new people coming into CORE, they didn't believe like Farmer did that nonviolence is a way of life. It was a tactic, so you said. And so, fine. But other than that, we didn't have any need for it. Ain't nobody attacking us. Now, there was one time in 1964, we're demonstrating in front of one of the hotels, and some special forces guys attacked us, and we kicked their butts. And the judge who had been over us in a trial was standing there laughing. It was kind of funny. So that wasn't really the big deal. But the point is, when CORE comes into Louisiana, the deacons welcome them. How do they welcome them? Well, in one community, the civil rights workers came in, and they were immediately attacked by the Klan. And so what happened is they ran into a Black restaurant. And guess what? There were a whole bunch of armed Black men there. Saved their little lives. You understand? And this was before Bogalusa. And as a result, around this, the deacons were formed, and CORE members found themselves involved in self-defense work, defending homes. In fact, when they came into Black communities, the first thing Black people did was train them in how to shoot a shotgun, because the majority of Blacks in the South had shotguns. Now, the shotgun's okay for close up, but for distance, it's not so good. But they were well armed, and some of them had rifles, and most of them had pistols. And the sisters and brothers were training CORE people in how to defend themselves. So their national organization was talking nonviolence, but when they hit the ground, in Louisiana. One of the areas we worked in was Plaquemine Parish. The guy that ran the state of Louisiana at that time, his name was Leander Perez. He was actually a light-skinned black person passing as white. He ran the Klan. And I took a trip across the country when I bought me a TR6 mid-70s, and I got lost in Louisiana, New Orleans, and stopped at a sister's house. Well, she had been a freedom fighter during the 60s, and she told the story about how Leander Perez was in charge of, he was in charge of the right, he was actually in charge of, he was in charge of the Klan, but passing as white. And his mother had natural hair, so when anybody came by the house, they had that head wrapped up, and she pretended to be a servant. And he had all of the birth records of his family destroyed. But there was a place called Plaquemine Parish. I mean, Louisiana and Mississippi, there's some hellholes, baby. And this was an area where you had a prison out in the Everglades there, kind of like, and alligators all over the place. You hear me? And so when she went into Plaquemine Parish to organize, the first person to come was a representative of Leander Perez trying to buy her off, because on the black hand side, he wanted to give her a way out. And so she refused, and she called up Robert Kennedy, and she said, I need some help. Robert Kennedy said he couldn't do anything until someone got hurt. And she said, oh shit, baby, I just kept shooting. That was Louisiana. The key point about black folks in the South, the key point about black people in the United States of America is that the average black parent teaches their child that if you get hit, hit back. Am I telling the truth? Sometimes sisters are given this advice when they should be careful, because now they ain't fighting back with a fist. Somebody's pulling out a gun. It ain't even a knife anymore. You know what I mean? But the point is, self-defense is so integral to African American culture that it's as natural as breathing. You hear me? And so when you deal with the deacons for self-defense, and they come up and begin to organize self-defense units in different parts of the South, starting with Louisiana, they are drawing from this deep set of traditions of defending your family, yourself, and your community. Now, Akinyele Umoja has a broad definition of self-defense. He doesn't just talk about arms. He talks about any form of resistance that you put up. He said throwing a rock is self-defense. He described when you have a boycott and you're up there telling people to honor the boycott, which is part of how a boycott is effective, that's a form of self-defense. My father used brass knuckles. He avoided guns because he didn't want to go to jail. He didn't want to shoot somebody and end up in prison, even though it would be justified because he wasn't going to be doing that. But and he was a little guy, so he needed brass knuckles against somebody bigger. So self-defense takes many forms. And sisters are as likely to practice this as brothers. Now, the brother is expected to play a role. But if you take Ella Baker, for example, the sheriff of the area in which she lived in North Carolina called her the N-word, she kicked the hell out of her. And the family praised her for it. And she did not believe in any nonviolence. You know what I mean? So one of the effects of self-defense in the South was that it cut short the violence. And in the case of the deacons, they would organize deep. So in their communities, they would patrol the black community day and night. And if any white person came into the community, they were trailed. And if they caught them walking around the community at night, there'd be a number of deacons surrounding them with weapons. And these white boys became very submissive. Yes, sir, no, sir, and disappeared. never showed up again. And then in the case of shootouts, well, that's what happened. So generally, armed self-defense, and because the deacons had a secret society kind of base to them, and sisters were taught how to shoot and were prepared to defend their families. But particularly at this time, they saw it as the man's first responsibility. You're supposed to be out there defending me. But somebody's busted into your home, she's taught how to blow them away, you know? Now that was the South. That was Mississippi. That's New Orleans. That's South Carolina, which, by the way, CORE also organized in South Carolina. That was some hell the likes of which you ain't facing here. You're facing more black on black violence than you are with anything else. But please believe me, the other type can emerge. And so these secret societies are important for that. But they're also important for Africanizing our people. They're important for transforming our people from the Negro stage to the African stage. It's a very important institution. It's one that we need to know more about. As we are doing educational systems, the same thing. We've had rites of passage programs. Those are really grounded, should be grounded in these kinds of principles. Some are, some are not, but they should be. So today we have the task of rebuilding Black families, Black communities in an age of encroaching fascism. So we need to draw from the best of these traditions and the kind of organizing that we create, the kind of men and women we're out to shape, to rebuild Black communities so it's got strong families, because they have been weakened by the forces of neoliberalism that's caused the choice between two cultures. And so the twinlineal tradition is really the foundation for that. And these secret societies are one thing that we need to draw from. So I hope you got something out of this. Hotep, let me see if there's any questions here. Brother Ugawa, how do these secret societies protect our economic interests, including businesses and the community markets they served during Jim Crow? That was rough because, you see, during Jim Crow, they went in and disarmed Black people. So you better understand what was going on there. And Blacks still kept arms, but there was a heavy disarmament. There are different phases of how this self-defense worked during Reconstruction and then the post-Reconstruction. So it wasn't an easy thing, and you had to be prepared to defend. If someone wanted what you had, they would literally come to your house and tell you to leave, or just kill you and take it. So you got to understand, the ability to defend was based on the ability to have weapons to defend. And some of us had it, some of us didn't. But when we did, we were often able to keep things strong. And sometimes this was also tied to spirit, because I've given this example before. There was one slave, not slave narrative, but it was an ex-slave who's giving an account of, it was a woman, she's giving an account of what happened during post-Reconstruction in the South. And her husband had a dream that the Klan was coming. So he brought together a group of Black men. And when they came, they started shooting at him. The Klan left. That was the end of it. So spirit sometimes aided you in this. So it depended on what you had. It also depended on where you were, because you could get attacked on some road or something. You know what I mean? So it depended. So it wasn't that we didn't know how to defend what we had, the little that we had. Wolf Banlew, Trump's goons, snatched up a PhD student off the streets. What makes it think it won't happen to us? You're darn right. And they're trying to charge her with having a connection to Hamas. She was a part of student demonstrations protesting genocide in Gaza. You know, they grabbed her and took her down to Louisiana because they want to take her away from any base of support. So they got lawyers and stuff working on that. You're darn right. Could be anybody. So anybody that thinks that it's just Latinos they're going after, don't kid yourself. Wolf Manlou, does the advantages gained by the black Greek frat sororities outweigh the negatives of them to blacks here in America? Uh, hmm. Well, a lot of the secret societies, the frats and sororities, particularly these are not just frats and sororities, but the Masonic orders. Those orders are based on an Egyptian model. And while the Greek piece of it is unfortunate, there are positive aspects to these societies. And they generally bring together men and women in their two groupings that provide a network of support for them. I told you I wasn't really suited for fraternal orders, but I did pledge the alphas when I was in college. And when they told me to do something that made no sense, put a former head of the alphas into a gunny bag and drop him off on campus, the other guy and I who were given that assignment, I said, let's do that to the president. Of course, he behaved so bad that we would have hurt him if we had done it. But he was asking us to kidnap somebody. That's a felony. But more important, it was stupid. But I realized what they were doing. They were trying to get you to, accept the idea that you follow orders. I don't do anything that's wrong. So, I'm not doing that. And so that was the end of my pledging and my friends pledging. And I had no problem with that. I don't know about the Greek societies and the Klan. I'm talking secret societies, so I don't know anything about it. But who knows? Because who knows what somebody did when it came to facing violence? So who knows? Just because you're in a secret, into a Greek society doesn't mean you are or are not going to stand up for your people. Yeah, Wolf Manlou, you got that right. I'm using the 60s and 70s as examples for resistance. I'm sick and tired of all this gangster stuff. That's all you ever hear. That's our best period. But now as well, I talk about Black Lives Matter. I talk about anything right now. Imhotep wants to keep people out of the military right now. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Ogawa can tell me the exact episode. Episode 108. Adapting comedic mystery training to free our minds. Right on, brother. Yeah, that's the one. And then Ogawa is saying for other secret society information, episode 105. Okay. Hecka, were there any requirements for someone outside wanting to join secret societies besides taking oaths? Oh, yeah. And they were secret. They were initiatory. And that's why generally people who come from the outside and say study Africa, anthropologists, historians, they get a certain kind of view of history or culture, and they think they've got everything. But to really know this history, you have to have been initiated. And initiation involves trials of different sorts that are secret. So that's the answer there. Yeah, there were oaths. There's a whole lot more than that. I'm taking oaths. A whole lot more. trials and tests, the likes of which you would never want to go through. Okay. Now, y'all up here having conversations. I hope you are listening. Ash Shakir Whitaker. I'm aware that the movies tell us a different story, but I read somewhere that Shaka Zulu himself was surprised when the elders did not check him in his excesses. Well, in the end, he was checked in his excesses by his brother, Dengani, who killed him because he was going too far in punishment and everything else. Okay. Yvette Anderson, America is more vested in war, not technology and infrastructure. Very true. Okay, Ogawa. Let's see. Thank you there, Felicia. Let's see. Wolf Manlu, we must gather together under the banner of Black, not Democrat, not female, not American, not only under concept except Black, not any other concept except Black. Yeah, right on. Wolf Manlu was talking about the magical Kemet. It's a powerful, one of the most powerful lectures that Wolf Manlu has heard. Good. Okay. Don Maxine Casey, greetings from the island country of Bermuda. Right on. Glad to have you, Don. Glad to have you. See if there's anything new here. Well, I think that's it. Okay, I hope people got something out of this. Until next week, Hotep.